Good morning. It's better now. Thank you so much for your time to be with us here at the Embassy of Pakistan this morning. I'm sure you know that this year has been particularly busy. Being in Thailand, we've seen so much activity with regard to Southeast Asia, ASEAN. Thailand was also chairing ASEAN during this year. But I thought that, and there is much interest also among the academia and among the press as to what is happening elsewhere, not very far from here, but moving a little bit from Southeast Asia to South Asia, which is our region. So we thought this is a good opportunity at the end of the year to brief colleagues a little bit about the situation in South Asia, because South Asia, as you know, is home to two of the biggest countries in Asia, which is India and Pakistan. And as compared to ASEAN, where you have very active and collaborative regional mechanisms which are working functional like ASEAN. In South Asia, the cooperation spirit is somewhat blocked. SAARC is not working, and there are other issues in the region which threaten peace and stability in South Asia. You know that there is ongoing conflict in Afghanistan for 40 years now, and there are expedited and very serious concerted efforts going on. Pakistan is playing a major part in that to bring kind of peace and stability to Afghanistan. This is in the best interest of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and our entire region. Similarly, another issue that has really impacted peace and stability and also development in South Asia is the long-standing issue or dispute over Kashmir. So I'm sure you have some background about the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, which is a dispute between India and Pakistan, but it has really spun out of control during this year, especially during the last 4 or 5 months, and is really a great and a grave threat to regional peace and security at this point of time. So we thought that we take this opportunity to brief you a little bit about the crisis in Kashmir, and at the end I will be happy to take your comments and to discuss this issue. Basically, Kashmir is a multi-dimensional crisis. It has several aspects. Obviously, political and legal issues are there from the beginning. There are human rights violations issues. It is a humanitarian crisis increasingly, and it has always been a threat to peace and security in the region. I mean, just earlier this week, on 10th of December, the entire world commemorated the International Day of Human Rights, but we know that there are many places around the world where the human rights situation is pretty bad and has regressed actually in many of the regions, and prime example of that is Kashmir, where you know that since 5th of August there is this ongoing lockdown and a kind of a complete media blackout in the Indian side of Kashmir. Today, I mean, if you count from 5th of August, it is 128th day of this blackout. But this crisis, this dispute, is not only 128 days old. It is a historical tragedy. It started from the time of independence of India and Pakistan. So basically it is 72 years already and counting. And this is a struggle for self-determination. And during the course of this struggle, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost. There have been cases of human rights violations, enforced disappearances and killings, including sexual violence, which have been extensively reported by the international human rights organizations, the UN High Commission for Human Rights, and many other bodies. Just to very briefly recap the basic facts about the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. So there are just 2 or 3 main points to remember: that this is an internationally recognized dispute, and it is on the agenda of UN Security Council since 1948. Number 2, it is a disputed region between India and Pakistan. And according to the UN resolutions, no party can unilaterally change the status of Jammu and Kashmir. And the UN Security Council resolutions also prescribe a method, which is a peaceful method of resolving this dispute. And the main principle of this peaceful method is what you see here in red, that the final status or the question of accession of Kashmir to India or Pakistan is to be decided by the will of the Kashmiri people, expressed through the democratic method of a plebiscite or a referendum, to be held under the auspices of the UN. So basically, it is also a question of self-determination. Now, coming back to the current developments, as you recall, on 5th of August, the Indian government basically revoked the 2 articles in the Indian Constitution that gave a special status and limited autonomy to the part of Kashmir which is under the control of India. Basically, under international law, this is a unilateral action which is in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. It has very logically led to widespread resentment and reaction by the people in the Kashmir Valley. So since August the 5th, I'm sure you would have seen the news reports that are coming out. The political leaders and activists, they have been arbitrarily arrested in Kashmir. There are thousands of Kashmiris who have been arrested and moved to undisclosed locations, many outside the Kashmir region. And before taking these steps, Indian government deployed an additional 180,000 troops, and that brought the total deployment to around 900,000. So this Kashmir was already the most heavily militarized zone in the world before this additional deployment. And then coupled with that are draconian laws. There is total impunity and no accountability of the armed forces. There are some laws which are applicable in the state, under which a person can be taken away and detained incommunicado for 2 years with no recourse, with no legal recourse. These are some of the provisions in the laws. So this is what we have been seeing for the last 128 days. Continued harassment, especially harassment and sexual violation against Kashmiri women. And they have especially targeted the young boys, and this is a report from the National Federation of Indian Women, according to which 13,000 boys have been detained since 5th August. In this period of over 4 months, about 13,000 young boys have been detained. And the forces continue to use these pellet guns, which have blinded many hundreds in Kashmir. So basically, as of today, the lockdown is still in place. Internet remains suspended. Local media is throttled. And you can imagine that, if we are without our cell phones or internet service for 1 hour, we can imagine, what could be, we cannot work, cannot communicate with anyone. So this has been going on in the Indian side of Kashmir, especially in the Kashmir Valley. No internet services, and they have only partially restored the landlines in some areas. So this is what they are going through. Basically they have been completely cut off from the world and from within. And despite this, the disappointing part is that India somehow is trying to project the entire situation as normal. So basically they're saying there is normalcy in the region, while that is, the situation is exactly opposite. India at the same time, in order to hide the human rights violations in Kashmir, they have been trying to portray the legitimate struggle for self-determination of the Kashmiri people. They say, well, basically it is all terrorism. In fact, they are using force to oppress women and children and innocent civilians, and many independent analysts have written that this is a classic case of state terrorism. And I think it needs to be noted that rights abuses are not limited to Kashmir. There is an increasing trend of extremism and violence against minorities in India. And you see that in policies and legislations and other actions in India which are directed against minorities. I'm sure you know about the new citizens register in Assam that has sort of excluded about 2 million people, mostly Muslims, from the citizen registry. And only yesterday they passed this citizenship amendment bill, which has also been criticized by many countries around the world and human rights organizations, because it is something that discriminates on the basis of religion. And earlier you saw that the Indian Supreme Court actually gave out its verdict on the Babri Mosque case, awarding the site to the Hindu parties. And ironically, this judgment was passed on 9th of November, which was exactly the date on which Pakistan opened the Kartarpur corridor across the border with India to facilitate the Sikh pilgrims. So, these are the contrasting images that are coming out. On the left you see the Babri Mosque, which was demolished in 1992, and on the right you see this new splendid complex in Kartarpur that has been refurbished by Pakistan. And coming to the peace and security dimension of the issue, there has been a dramatic rise in ceasefire violations across the line of control, and which has resulted in casualties and injuries to the Kashmiri population. One aspect that needs to be noted is this phenomena of false flag operations. So this is basically, this concept that some incident, for example, if it happens in India, they would blame it immediately without any verification or proof on Pakistan. So there are certain reasons they do that, for the hysteria, the anti-Pakistan sentiment that they use for political purposes, and also to sort of hide, their human rights violations and the grave situation in Kashmir. That they use such false flag operations. They have used that in the past, and Pakistan has been, drawing attention of its friends that such a possibility exists even now. So basically, the situation is such that the gravity of the situation, it requires some immediate actions. I've listed only a few of them. Most important is complete lifting of the curfew in the Kashmir Valley, removal of the restrictions on movement, the right for peaceful assembly, provision of food and medical supplies, the release of political prisoners, and reversal of illegal actions taken by the Indian government on 5th of August. I mean, we basically expect the international community to urge India to immediately end the use of live fire and pellet guns against civilians, including women and children in Kashmir. India should adhere to international human rights obligations, and it should listen to the demands of the international community, including from the UN, to allow international media and independent observers to the Indian occupied Kashmir. The basic purpose of this would be to independently verify the reports of abuse and human rights violations. I think, most of you, being from the media and journalist community, know the importance of access and being able to independently report and verify what is happening on ground. So I'm sure you have seen there's so many reports that have come out. Most recent was this long report and article by Dexter Felkins in the New Yorker. I'm sure you would have seen that. And only a day before yesterday, Dexter Felkins and Rana Ayub, they were on CNN with Christiana Manpur, also discussing the situation in Kashmir, and many others have reported on the evolving situation. So basically, when we talk about peace and security, it's not something abstract. It's not only something on the paper, or that we are creating some hysteria, because this is based on history. There are heightened tensions. There are ceasefire violations taking place, and we know that the fact that Kashmir issue has not been resolved over the past 70 years, it has also resulted in wars, actual conflicts between India and Pakistan. So that is why we urge and we expect that the situation in Kashmir will continue to be watched closely by the international community, and special responsibility lies with regard to the peace and security aspect with the UN Security Council in New York, and with regard to the human rights dimension with the Human Rights Council in Geneva. On its part, Pakistan has a pretty consistent and standard position on Kashmir. We support the UN resolutions on Kashmir. We support the solution prescribed by the UN Security Council to resolve the Kashmir dispute, and we will continue to extend our political and moral and diplomatic support for the people of Kashmir till they attain their right to self-determination. This is a right which has been actually promised to them under the UN Security Council resolutions. I thought I should finish this little talk with a small video. I think it's a 3-4 minute video. There are many reports I'm sure you have seen, but this is one of them which shows in pictures and through interviews as to what actually is happening down there in Kashmir. So let's play that.
It's Friday. On the streets of Kashmir, notice. It's Friday. On the streets of Kashmir. It's Friday. On the streets of Kashmir, notice. It's the day Muslims normally gather to pray, but in recent weeks, it's also become a day of protest. Indian authorities are working hard to keep a lid on displays like this, but they can't change how people feel. As protests break out across Kashmir, Indian officials repeat what has become a well-worn sound.
There has been no major dawn of restriction reported from across the valley. Life is slowly returning to normal.
The situation is returning back slowly to the normal.
But things here don't seem normal. Kashmir has been a conflict zone for decades. But when India moved to strip the region of its autonomy along its cliff, the situation came to this. Thousands more troops, and a curfew bringing daily life to a standstill. Phone lines and internet access were shut down, cutting off around 8 million Kashmiris from the outside world. So, we came to see what's actually happening. We visit a neighborhood known for frequent clashes between protesters and Indian security forces. People here are in mourning. Fahmida Shabu was at home with her children and her in-laws on August 9. Police started firing tear gas at protesters outside. Fahmida's husband, Rafi, had to rush her to the hospital, but doctors could not revive her. a sudden death, and no one to hold accountable. In addition to tear gas, for years, Indian forces used pellet guns to quell unrest in Kashmir. These shotguns fire cartridges full of lead pellets that lodge themselves in the flesh. They are supposedly non-lethal, but can cause life-changing disabilities. Parvez Silky says it was at home when he heard a commotion outside. When he opened the door to see what was happening, he became a target. In the name of maintaining law and order, Indian forces have licensed to shoot with no impunity in Kashmir. There's no official number of the injured, but in just one hospital here, sources told us over 60 people have been admitted with pellet wounds since the lockdown began. Still, this doesn't stop some people.
और इंशाल्लाह ये मैं इंशाल्लाह इसको मेरे दुनिया दे इसका से इंशाल्लाह
And lives here have been upended in other ways too. This woman's 22-year-old son, Rajdeen, was arrested. She doesn't know why he was taken. Since then, authorities have been giving her conflicting information. This is not an isolated case. Since early August, thousands have been arrested without being charged, and there's no indication when or if they'll be released. Although some landlines have been reconnected, Kashmir is still largely cut off from the rest of the world. That helps authorities keep stories like these quiet. But as the days pass, they're getting louder.
So, this I thought was particularly relevant, because you also, most of you from the media and from the press and journalist community, one of the basic problems out there is that there is complete lockdown. The foreign press is not allowed access. The local press has not been allowed to work, and in any case it's very difficult for them to file stories because the communications are down. So because there's no internet, there's no instant way of communicating and sending out the stories. This is one of the biggest problems that the local journalists are facing there in Kashmir right now. So this was something that we thought we should bring you up to date with, the situation on the ground in Kashmir. I'll be very happy to take any of your questions or comments.
Hello, I'm Hazai from the Swiss Times, and I actually have questions in regards to two issues. So I don't know, maybe I should go one by one. So the first issue is about the so-called Kashmir sales. Can you confirm that there have been Kashmir debt or sales at Pakistan missions abroad, worldwide, in every country, including Thailand? Are they operational at the moment? and what do you say to India's accusation that this could be used to incite violence?
And you had another question?
Another question is about the Katapora corridor. Would you say that since opening, since last month, do you have some sort of rough figures how many Indian Sikhs have crossed to visit the Gurdwara, and would you call that a success? And with this initiative of the Katapora corridor, do you think it would help bring collaboration between India and Pakistan to help improve the ties? Thank you.
Okay. So I think your first question not very clear to me, but I think you are referring to a statement of the Indian government
Yes.
that there are so-called Kashmir cells in the embassies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you can confirm on whether or not there are such cells, and if they are operational at the moment worldwide, including Thailand.
I think this is quite an ignorant kind of I wouldn't say ignorant, maybe misleading kind of statement from India to say that Pakistan has Kashmir cells and which are used to propagate our position on Kashmir. As I told you, Pakistan is a party to the Kashmir dispute. Kashmir dispute is an international dispute, internationally recognized. It is on the agenda of the UN Security Council. There are two parties to the dispute. One is India, the other is Pakistan. And many people also say that the Kashmiris themselves, they are the third party to the dispute. And as a legitimate party to the dispute, we have legitimate interest in promoting and defending our positions on the question of Kashmir. And we have all the right under international law to do that. We do that openly, there is nothing to hide. I as ambassador, I do that openly. This is my responsibility, this is the responsibility of all the ambassadors and embassies around the world, and we have nothing to hide about that. So I think this is just a misleading thing from the Indian side to say that there is a cell or something or whatever. I think they should come up clearly as to what do they mean by that, and we can then engage on that. I think your second question was about Kartarpur corridor. You need to see that the opening of this corridor, and it was brought about by a fundamental and very strong conviction by our government and the Prime Minister, who said that we are going to do that. And actually, if you talk to people who are privy to what was happening behind the scenes, so there were two things happening. One was the situation that was deteriorating in Kashmir. People were being killed, human rights violations. There was a lot of pressure, even on Pakistan and our government not to, in this kind of situation, not to go ahead with this corridor. But our government persisted. On the other hand, the Indians were always reluctant. They did not want to do that. But since we were serious, we were moving, so they had to come along. In the end, they had to come along. So basically, if Kartarpur has happened, it is mostly because it was really given a big push by the Pakistan government, and Indians, in the end, they had to come along and to join. So I think this is a big initiative. This is a very important initiative. It has been appreciated worldwide. It has evoked a good response. And although I don't have the exact figures, we can find out and let you know how many people have been crossing every day. But the capacity was about 5,000 people to cross over every day without visas. and to pay homage at the holy site and to go back. Yes.
I also have two questions. Which specific role Pakistan expect for the superpower and the other countries regarding Kashmir dispute? And my other question: India is violating human rights throughout the country and threat the minority. Sir, what is the future of minority in India in this context?
I think Pakistan's expectations from the international community as a whole is that, and basically here we are not asking for any favor. I mean, I think this has to be clear. We are not saying that you support us vis-a-vis India. Well, what we are basically saying is that the matter was taken to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council adopted several resolutions, and the crux of those resolutions is that the people of Kashmir will decide whether they want to join with India or Pakistan. All we are asking is that these resolutions should be honored and implemented. So this is our expectation from the international community, that they will impress upon India to carry out and implement these resolutions. You have spoken about the big powers or the superpowers. Basically, I can take it in a way that if you talk about Security Council, there are permanent members in the Security Council. These are the big countries who make decisive actions in the Security Council. So I think as members and as permanent members of the Security Council, it is their special responsibility to implement their own resolutions and implement the resolutions that were adopted by the Security Council itself. So I think this is our major demand. And I think this is with regard to the resolution of the dispute, which has to be done. Right now, I think there are certain steps that need to be taken before that, because you can imagine that in this kind of a situation, moving directly to a resolution of the Kashmir dispute maybe is not going to happen very soon, anytime soon. But what needs to be done is that the human rights violations have to stop, and all those steps that I mentioned, that the curfew has to be lifted, the communications blackout has to be lifted, and to bring some kind of normalcy back to the situation. I think only then will create some kind of environment in dialogue, in which dialogue can take place, and in which such discussion as to how UN resolutions can be implemented. I think your second question was, what was it, about human rights violations?
Yes.
Yeah. I think, as I very briefly mentioned, there is this increasing trend of extremism and violence in India. It has gained momentum ever since the government of BJP and Mr. Modi, the last term 2014 onwards, and the present term. So it has kind of escalated in recent years, and so that is the reason that we see that the human rights situation in India is increasingly under focus, and the violations, basically, if you see the Assam, what is happening in Assam, the citizenship amendment bill, the lynching of Muslims on the streets, the violence and rape, and sometimes gang rapes in major cities. This is seen as being driven by this philosophy of BJP and its parent body, which is the RSS and VHP, based on Hindutva. Basically they're trying to promote and through use of force and policies, Hindu supremacy in India, which is a very dangerous trend for a big country like India, over 1 billion population. And given the fact that much of these actions at the moment, they are directed mostly against the Muslims in India, is even more something of concern, because although Muslims are in minority in India, but if you look at the whole population, I mean, they are more than 200 million. It's a minority given by the figures, but the number is pretty big. So 200 million people in the country. I mean, if you go about persecuting them, they cannot be, this cannot be known, cannot be controlled. So that is why I think very rightly so, the international community is taking attention. Is paying attention to this. You must have seen the other day there was a statement by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. They have taken note of the passage of this citizenship amendment bill, and they have recommended that the US government should take action against the responsible Indian politicians in this case. There are many other countries who have
do you have any information how the lockdown may affect
Is there any possibility to have a dialogue with voting?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously very difficult to, put that in figures. But since the nature of the lockdown is such that the entire life has come to a standstill, so you can imagine what impact it has on the daily life, the human rights, and on the economy. So basically, schools are shut down. There's no schools, colleges, universities over the last 4 months, more than 4 months. The bigger religious institutions like mosques, the main mosques, people are not allowed to go and offer prayers. Hospitals are very badly impacted, lack of medicines and supplies. And since there is curfew and security checks, it is very difficult to even use. So this has impacted on the other side, there is this strong military presence, and what they're doing is that they are raiding homes, especially at night, taking away men, particularly young boys, threatening the females, the women and girls in the houses. And so this is a parallel activity that is underway. The entire political leadership is in prison, and this includes the leaders of those political parties which have traditionally worked closely with the Indian government, which were not very much liked by the normal Kashmiri population. So even those leaders, they are under house arrest or prison. So there is no political leadership which is allowed to raise voice openly for the people. People are not allowed to come out on the streets. As on Fridays, prayer time, when people do try to come out and get together, they use force. So the entire, the daily, what you can imagine, compare with what is our daily schedule. We get up, our kids are going to school, we go to the office, and after the whole day you come and return back to your home in safety. And it's the exact opposite in Kashmir. And obviously the economic situation has been badly damaged because there are no visitors. Basically, tourism has been affected. Much of the economy is coming from tourism. And on the agriculture side, the major crops like apples and other dry fruits have been really impacted. It's not been able to export. The daily functioning is badly impacted. So I would say it's not only economy, it's the entire, all the spheres of daily life that have been badly impacted by the situation.
Is not very good because you know that Pakistan's position has always been that we are ready to resolve this issue through dialogue. Even the UN Security Council resolution says that the matter has to be resolved peacefully. They recommend that you ask both countries to enable the people of Kashmir. India and the obviously it has to be a peaceful resolution. These mechanisms for that.
What is your last point?
The problem is there any possibility to have a dialogue with they have disrupted, in fact, the dialogue process, the opposite dialogue process.
Yeah, okay. So I think on your first comment, this point has been raised in our foreign minister and the senior officials of the ministry. They have responded to that all different kinds of options are under consideration, and one of the options was why not to raise it in the ICJ. And there are many things to be seen in that regard, the question of jurisdiction and the aspects. So I'm sure any decision is taken will be taken take into consideration all the legal and political aspects, whether it is possible and whether it is going to help the situation. But if you look at it is actually, these could be supplementary, even if it is possible, these could be supplementary steps or actions. But as I said, because the issue involves the peace and security dimension and the human rights dimension, and so both lie very squarely with some of the other institutions of the UN. So that means Security Council in New York, which has the responsibility. They think that they should discuss the evolving situation in Kashmir regularly, regular briefings on the Secretariat, so that the Council is informed as to what is happening and they can play a role. Similarly, in the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and they have done their work. If you look at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, they came up with a report, a very detailed report on the human rights situation in Kashmir, both on Indian and Pakistan side in 2018, and they came up with a follow-up report in July 2019. So if you look at these reports, they are very comprehensive. They document the situation and they come up with very concrete recommendations, and one of the recommendations is that there should be an independent commission of inquiry which should inquire into and come up with a report on the human rights violations. So basically it is not a question whether violations are taking place or not for some ICJ or someone to decide, but the violations are taking place. It's a question of what needs to be done, and how seriously and quickly some actions can be taken. And in that regard, the Security Council and Human Rights Council are more relevant. Your question about dialogue is very important, very interesting, but the perspective is not very good, as you know that. And Pakistan's position has always been that we are ready to resolve this issue through dialogue. Even the UN Security Council resolutions say that the matter has to be resolved peacefully, and they recommend that it is you ask both countries, enable the people of Kashmir to tell what do they want, and obviously it has to be a peaceful resolution, and the mechanisms for that have to be agreed through dialogue. But the problem in recent years is that the Indian government is not interested in a genuine dialogue, and they have disrupted, in fact, the dialogue process. We had a composite dialogue process. They have discontinued it, and I think despite the it's not only that Pakistan has been saying that there should be dialogue, but all our common friends, the UN, the major countries, the big powers, other neighborly and friendly countries, countries which are both friends to India and Pakistan, they have been advising that there should be dialogue. In fact, this is the first thing that any country would say. If you go and talk to them, they say that there should be dialogue. And they have been urging also. But I think unfortunately, the Indian government's position in recent years has been kind of anti-dialogue, and they have not really engaged, they have not really tried to engage Pakistan. And on one or two occasions, like not this year, last year, there was this agreement that the foreign ministers would meet on the sidelines of the UNGA session in September in New York. And I think immediately after making that announcement, the Indian government went back on it and cancelled that engagement. So they are not really, forthcoming on this matter. But I think, as you rightly point out, this is the crux of the whole thing. The two countries have to sit down. Eventually, they have to sit down and have a dialogue, have a structured dialogue. It should be a genuine, a very committed, kind of sincere dialogue, which addresses the issues. And I think the core issue when it comes to dialogue between India and Pakistan, it remains the question of Kashmir. Any other points? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.